He thought she was just the wife. Quiet, loyal, forgettable. So when he chose another woman, he didn't expect her to walk away without a word. But months later, as his company crumbled and his name was dragged through the mud, he realized the truth. It's funny how quickly a room can notice your aloneness. You walk into a gala alone, and suddenly people look twice. The women blink slowly, almost calculating. The men nod with polite confusion. It's not judgment. Not quite. It's curiosity. Where's your husband? I knew that question was coming before I even entered the building. I'd picked my outfit carefully. Black velvet off-shoulder, minimal jewelry, a clean bun. Something that said, yes, I came alone, and no, it's not by accident. Still, as I stepped through the grand foyer of the Montclair Art Museum, my fingers curled involuntarily around the clutch in my hand. This gala, the Archistar's annual, was one Daniel and I had attended together every year since we got married. Correction, since I married him. Our firm, Whitmore & Company, had started as his dream but my execution. Daniel was the face, camera-ready, tall, always knowing the right things to say at investor dinners and ribbon cuttings. I was the pencil, the drafts, the permits, the long nights hunched over AutoCAD and paper when the software failed. They called us a power couple. They weren't wrong. But I was only powerful when I was invisible. The first person to spot me was Malcolm Yates, a senior partner at Hensley Developments. He used to hit on me before he realized I wasn't just Daniel's intern. Now he calls me Miss Backbone. Elena, he greeted, sipping champagne. Flying solo tonight? There was 5 words. No way around it. I smiled. Daniel's stuck in Bali. He sent his regrets. Technically true. He was in Bali. But he wasn't stuck. He had chosen to stay. With her. Sophia Landry. A name I'd only heard in whispers until 3 months ago. They met in grad school. She left for a design scholarship in France. He cried into a whiskey bottle for 2 weeks, and then I came along. A sharp-dressing, quiet-talking transfer student who loved minimalist structures and silence more than attention. He said he liked how I never made things complicated. What he meant was, I never made him question if he was the star. Sophia came back into our lives like a summer storm. Sudden, elegant, and devastating. She arrived as a guest speaker at our firm's design series. I watched Daniel's face the moment she walked into the boardroom, saw the way his voice dropped half an octave. The way his hand moved to his wedding ring but didn't quite touch it. That night he didn't come home until 2 a.m. Said he was catching up with an old friend. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just added a new note to the folder labeled exit plan in my encrypted drive. Back at the gala, the buzz was loud now. Everyone talking about Landry and Whitmore's proposed collaboration for the new arts campus downtown. A $12 million project. Highly visible. Politically tied. A launch pad. Daniel's biggest public pitch yet, and he was doing it without me. Worse, he was doing it with her. I made my way toward the back of the room, where the featured models and architectural renderings were displayed on easels. There it was, the joint proposal. Urban Harmony, a Whitmore-Landry vision. And beneath the title, 3 renders. One was hers. One was his. The third was mine. Lifted from my private archive, the Oasis courtyard concept I had drafted 2 years ago and quietly shelved. He hadn't even changed the measurements. He just renamed it. Landry Atrium. Stunning, isn't it? I turned slowly. Sophia stood beside me, clutching a glass of white wine. She wore a satin slip dress in sage green. Delicate, effortless, the kind of beauty you associate with French bookstores and candlelight. Elena, she said as if my name had just been plucked from a forgotten shelf. I was hoping you'd come. Were you? I asked, voice even. Of course. She tilted her head. Daniel speaks so highly of you. He says you're the real reason the firm exists. My lips curled. Interesting. That's not what the bylines say. Sophia gave a breathy little laugh. You know how men are. Yes. I did. We stood in silence for a moment, both of us looking at the model. My model, rebranded and reclaimed like it never passed through my hands. Finally, I said, you should tell him to adjust the window ratios on the north wing. The shadowing will ruin the natural light after 2 p.m. Sophia blinked. Oh. Unless the atrium is purely decorative. Which would be disappointing. A flicker of something passed through her expression. Then she smiled too wide. Well, this was lovely, she said. Give my love to Miles. She walked away without waiting for a reply. Miles. My son. The one they forget exists when they're busy playing genius and muse. I left early. Didn't say goodbye to Malcolm. Didn't circle back to the main floor. Just stepped out into the cold air, my heels tapping across the marble steps like punctuation marks in a sentence I was finally ending. The car ride home was silent. The driver asked if I wanted music. I said no. I needed to hear the silence. To sit in it. To mourn it. Because it wasn't just that Daniel had picked someone else to share a stage with. It was that he'd used my sketch to do it. When I got home, the sitter handed Miles to me with a tired smile. He just fell asleep. Do you want me to stay a bit longer? I shook my head. Thank you. Go home. I sat on the edge of the bed holding my son close. He stirred slightly then settled again. His breath warm against my shoulder. And I whispered not to him but to myself. You were the sketch. I was the structure. You just couldn't tell the difference. That night I opened my laptop. Opened the folder. Exit plan phase 1. Legal separation. And I began. Not with rage. Not with revenge. With precision. Because Daniel may have drawn over my lines. But I still held the ruler. Most people think a blueprint starts with walls. Rooms. Doors. But any good designer knows. It starts with load-bearing lines. Invisible ones. Foundational. That was me in our marriage. The line underneath everything. But Daniel forgot. Or maybe he never noticed. And when you forget what holds your structure up, eventually it collapses. The morning after the gala, I woke before the sun. Made myself black coffee. Fed Miles mashed bananas and oatmeal. Watched the city blink awake through the windows of a high-rise I designed but never got credit for. Then I pulled out a box from the top shelf of my home office. One Daniel had never noticed was missing. Inside, my old sketchbooks. The ones I stopped using when we merged into Whitmore and Company. He once told me, "Your ideas are brilliant, but we need to speak with one voice." So I let him use mine. I flipped through pages of designs that bore my handwriting. Courtyard concepts, spatial flow studies, ventilation notes. All scrawled in the slanted cursive I'd been perfecting since design school. And then I found it. Atrium Study Number 3, working title, Oasis Courtyard. He hadn't even bothered to change the working title before rebranding it as the Landry Atrium. I laughed. Stiffly. Bitterly. Then scanned the entire book page by page and uploaded it to a password-protected folder titled, Asset Recovery. By noon Miles was down for a nap and I had sent 3 emails. One to my intellectual property lawyer, Avery. One to my accountant, asking to trace Daniel's licensing revenues. And one to myself, subject line. Reminder, you are not what he used. You are what he needed. Avery called that evening. You have a solid case, she said, voice sharp and efficient as always. He rebranded your designs without attribution. And since they were created before the LLC's founding, guess what? I closed my eyes. They're mine. Legally and conceptually. You can sue. I don't want to sue. A beat of silence. Elena, he stole your work. I know. Then why? Because I don't want to win in court, I whispered. I want to win in legacy. Daniel used to say I was the best drafter he'd ever seen. Clean, disciplined, detail-obsessed. But the truth was I wasn't obsessed with details. I was obsessed with making things last. That's why I never fought over credit. That's why I never pushed back when he gave media interviews solo. That's why I stopped signing drawings and let him take our last design award with a speech that didn't even mention me. Because I thought we were building something together. Turns out I was just helping him build something for someone else. Flashbacks hit at the oddest moments. That night while I stood brushing my teeth, I remembered the time Daniel stayed up sketching until 4 a.m. for a restaurant redesign. I brought him hot tea and massaged his shoulders. He looked over his shoulder and said, "You'd make a great assistant." Thought he was teasing. I laughed. Now I realize he meant it. And I let him mean it. Miles woke at 2 a.m. crying. Night terror. I held him to my chest, humming lullabies with a shaky voice. When he settled back to sleep, I sat in the rocker and stared at the moonlight pooling across the floor. Then I opened my phone and began writing the first draft of my resignation letter. Not from the firm. From the lie. The next morning I walked into Whitmore and Company unannounced. Sophia was in the main meeting room, laughing with a group of junior designers. She paused when she saw me. "Elena," she said, surprised. "Everything okay?" I nodded politely, then turned to Jason, Daniel's right-hand assistant. "I need access to the project files from 3 years ago. Originals. I believe they're archived." Jason hesitated. That's not protocol." I leaned in and said quietly, "I'm the protocol. Find them." 20 minutes later I had what I needed. Time-stamped file metadata showing my name as the original creator of 10 core project concepts Daniel had presented as his own. Not that I planned to take him to court. But he didn't know that. Yet. Back home I made a spreadsheet. 2 columns. What he took, what I'm taking back. My ideas, my name restored. My confidence, my independence. My silence, my story. Then I opened a new email draft. To Daniel Whitmore. Subject, a few corrections. Attached, a PDF of my original sketches, file logs, and a polite request for a formal IP transfer agreement. Back to me. No lawsuit threats. No ultimatums. Just documentation. Because Daniel always counted on me being quiet. He never imagined I'd speak in evidence. Avery called again the next day. He's panicking. His lawyer reached out. They want to meet. I won't go. Elena. I don't need closure. I just need control. That night I bought a domain. www.moreform.com. Minimalist design consultancy. My branding. My rules. I posted one design, the Oasis Courtyard, labeled properly under my name. Within 24 hours I had 4 inquiries and 1 exclusive feature request from a niche architecture blog titled, "The Woman Who Designed in Silence." Not anymore. Daniel didn't call. But Sophia did. Her voice on the phone was quiet. Nervous. "I didn't know, Elena. About the files. You didn't ask." I thought. Daniel said you stepped back because of the baby." "I didn't step back." He pushed me off the page. Long silence. "You're really doing this?" I looked down at my son, our son, sleeping peacefully in his crib. Then I said, "I already did. The day I left Whitmore and Company no one noticed. And that was the point. I'd already forwarded all essential files from my locked accounts to a private cloud, archived copies of every invoice I'd ever approved, and revoked my administrative access, quietly. The only sign of my exit was a single email. To all staff. Subject, transition notice. Dear team, effective immediately, I will no longer be involved in daily operations at Whitmore and Company. Thank you for the years of collaboration. Best, Elena Moore. Simple. Told. Final. Within 4 minutes my inbox began to flood. Some messages were supportive. Some confused. Jason, the assistant, replied twice asking if I needed clarification, or a call from Daniel. I didn't answer. Because Daniel didn't call. He never called. 2 days later I handed Avery the formal custody filing. We had adopted Miles 2 years into our marriage. After 3 failed IVF cycles and a miscarriage I grieved alone. Daniel had said, "Let's try later." I said, "Let's try now." He signed the adoption papers, gave a speech at the celebration dinner, and then flew to New York the next morning to tour a museum with Sophia's firm. No. I didn't need him deciding when he was a father. My mother moved in temporarily to help me get settled in the new apartment. It was smaller, older, not designed by me, and I loved it. It had windows that didn't match, squeaky floors, and a little brass plaque on the door with the number 304 in crooked engraving. It was real. Untouched by the curated perfection of Daniel's world. I called it the restart. Miles adapted faster than I did. He loved the rooftop garden, the neighbor's cat, the sound of the delivery guy's bicycle bell. Every morning he'd hand me a crayon and ask me to draw him a new building. So I did. Not for clients. Not for contracts. Just for him. It reminded me why I fell in love with design in the first place. Before clients. Before awards. Before Daniel. I launched Moreform with one client. A friend from grad school who ran a bookstore and wanted to expand. I sketched out a soft, warm space with open shelving and a sunken reading lounge. No angles. No minimalism. Just comfort. When we revealed it, she cried. "You made it feel like a hug," she said. I hadn't heard that in years. Meanwhile, Daniel's silence stretched longer. No lawsuits. No threats. No rebuttals. Avery said it was fear. Thought it was pride. He didn't want the world to know I was the reason Whitmore and Company functioned. He didn't want to admit he had drawn over my lines and expected the building to hold. And I wasn't going to offer him scaffolding. One afternoon, I picked up Miles from his preschool and saw the headline on a business news blog. Creative rift at Whitmore and Company. Sources say, internal instability threatens upcoming pitch. I knew what it meant. Sophia was trying to replace what I used to be. And failing. They could replicate my renderings. But not my reasoning. Because Daniel never understood. Architecture isn't about what you build. It's about what holds. And I had been the hold. That night, Miles crawled into my lap with his stuffed dog and said, "Mommy, do you miss your work?" I paused. "No, sweetheart. I just started my new work." He nodded like he understood. Then whispered, "Is Daddy coming back?" I kissed the top of his head. "No. But we're moving forward." He smiled, snuggled closer and said, "Can we build something tomorrow?" I whispered back, "We already are." 3 days later, I received a voicemail from a number I didn't recognize. Daniel's voice. Flat. Controlled. "Elena, I got the notice. About custody. About the name rights. About more form. I won't fight it. But I'd like to talk. About Miles. About the firm. About us." He paused. "I didn't realize it was over. Until you were already gone." I listened to the message 3 times. Then deleted it. Some things don't need a reply. Some things reply themselves, with silence. A week after that, I stood outside a commercial space for lease in the Arts District. It had large windows, exposed beams, bad lighting, and it was perfect. Avery met me there. "You sure about this?" she asked, toeing a loose tile on the floor. I nodded. "This is where I put down roots. My own." He looked around. "It's going to need work." I smiled. So did I. Revenge isn't always loud. Sometimes it arrives like an echo, unexpected, undeniable, and completely unbothered. For me, it came in the form of a client I hadn't pitched. Her name was Dana Patel, co-chair of the Arts and Culture Commission and a woman who had once toasted Daniel's visionary leadership at a gala I designed behind the scenes. She emailed me at 9:06 a.m. on a Tuesday. "Elena, I hear you've gone solo. I have a project that needs your signature. Let me know if you're available." She didn't mention Whitmore and Company. He didn't have to. By Thursday, I was seated across from Dana in a sunlit cafe, sketches and samples spread across the table. The project? A modern renovation of a century-old performing arts theater. The challenge? Preserve the soul, refresh the bones. In other words, my kind of work. Dana smiled as she handed me the signed agreement. "Honestly, Elena, I was hoping you'd step out of his shadow years ago." I tilted my head. "What gave you the impression I was in his shadow?" He grinned. "He stood in your light too long." I didn't ask how she knew. Didn't need to. Women like Dana see things. They know when a wife is an ornament, and when she's the entire framework. The very next day I got a call from a journalist. "Ms. Moore," she said, "we're doing a feature on independent female architects reshaping the city. I'd love to include you." I paused. "You know I haven't been public until recently." "I do," she said. "That's why the story matters." Meanwhile, shadows began falling at Whitmore and Company. I didn't check obsessively. Just enough. The buzz was subtle at first. Small delays in their flagship project. An article speculating tension between Daniel and his new partner, Sophia Landry. A thread on an architects forum questioning the originality of their new designs. Then came the leaks. One morning, I opened my inbox to find a confidential rendering labeled Landry Atrium, Revision 5. Was mine. Clumsily edited. Less soul, more symmetry. The sender? Anonymous. The message? They're unraveling. Thought you should see how desperate they are. I sat for a moment, letting the realization settle. They weren't just struggling without me. They were grasping for remnants of me. And it wouldn't be long before others noticed. My mother warned me not to gloat. "This is how resentment spreads," she said while folding Miles's laundry. "I'm not gloating," I replied. "I'm building." He gave me a knowing look. "Just be careful the difference doesn't blur." He was right. As always. But I wasn't doing this to punish them. I was doing it to reclaim me. The studio lease finalized on a Friday. By Monday, my contractors had gutted the place, exposing old wood beams and cement floors with stories etched into every crack. I designed the space around a single rule: no corners. Everything would be open, fluid, honest. I called it the Atrium Project. Yes, that atrium. But this time it belonged to me. Sophia texted me 1 week later. Sophia, I think we need to talk. I didn't respond. So she called. And against my better judgment, I answered. Elena, she said, voice tight. I know you're behind the leaks. I blinked. What leaks? Don't play dumb. The design files. The blog posts. The forum threads. I laughed. You think I have time to troll forums? You're trying to ruin us. I sighed. Sophia, I'm not trying to ruin you. I'm just not protecting you anymore. Silence. You don't understand, she whispered. No. I do. Better than you think. And I hung up. Daniel emailed 2 hours later. Subject: you win. Elena. Whatever this is, whatever game you're playing, just know you've made your point. The team's morale is shot. Investors are asking questions. You wanted the spotlight? It's yours. D. I stared at the email for a long time. Then I clicked delete. Because it wasn't about the spotlight. It never was. That night, I walked to the window of my new studio space, rolled out a blank sheet of vellum and picked up a charcoal pencil. I started sketching. Not for Dana's project. Not for a client. Not for a commission. Just for me. The outline of a space I'd never designed before. One with joy. One with peace. One without Daniel. When a house begins to fall apart, it doesn't happen all at once. First it creaks. Then it leans. Then the cracks show, spiderwebbing across the paint like veins of all the things left unsaid. Whitmore and Company was cracking. And for once I wasn't the one patching it back together. The news broke on a Thursday. I didn't have to look for it. It was sent to me by 3 former interns, 2 investors, and a journalist I'd once helped prepare for a design panel. Whitmore and Company. Drops from landmark renovation bid after original designer questions ethics. The story didn't mention my name directly. But the subtext was deafening. The commission cites unclear attribution of design origins and lack of transparency in ownership of foundational concepts. I sipped my coffee and watched the headlines stack up. Daniel had copied 1 too many designs. Sophia had rewritten 1 too many pitches. And I had stayed silent for far too long. Not anymore. That afternoon, I posted my first public design journal entry on Moreform's website. For years, my hands were in the renderings you admired, but my name wasn't. This is what rebuilding looks like, when you design without erasure. Attached, photos of my sketchbooks. Side-by-sides with built projects. My original plans. No bitterness. No names. Just truth. It went viral within 48 hours. By Saturday, the Architects Review released a feature titled, The Silent Mind Behind Whitmore and Company's Greatest Work Steps into the Light. Sophia called again. This time I didn't answer. She texted instead. Why are you doing this? I stared at the message, then typed and deleted my reply twice before landing on. You knew I was the blueprint. You just thought you could trace over me forever. The next blow came from the inside. A junior designer from Whitmore and Company, a bright, thoughtful woman named Rachel, applied to Moreform. Her email was short but potent. You once told me in passing that buildings don't whisper, they remember. I want to work somewhere that remembers who drew the first line. I hired her the next day. 3 more followed within a week. Meanwhile, Daniel's firm scrambled. Clients began pulling out of tentative deals. Investors sent curt messages asking for clarity. And the firm's Instagram page, once sleek and curated, became a war zone of comments. Didn't she design this? Give credit where it's due. Moreform is where the real genius is. Daniel tried to disable comments. The internet archived them anyway. My mother caught me staring at my laptop, expression unreadable. She sat beside me and handed me a cup of herbal tea. You okay? She asked. I nodded. I should feel something more dramatic. Vengeance. Relief. Triumph. And what do you feel? I shrugged. Tired. Maybe a little free. She smiled. Sounds like peace to me. A week later, Miles started drawing buildings of his own. They were lopsided, made of windows that looked like jelly beans and doors taller than trees. But when I asked what they were, he said, places where people don't get forgotten. I cried that night. Quietly. In the hallway. While holding a rendering tube filled with the design that had started it all. Daniel finally called. Blocked number. I let it go to voicemail. Then curiosity got the better of me. His voice was slow. Picky. Stripped of the arrogance he used to wear like a bespoke suit. Elena. I saw the articles. I saw the site. I just... Pause. I didn't think you'd actually walk away. But I thought you'd always be there. Quiet. Loyal. Pause. I messed it all up, didn't I? I deleted the voicemail without saving it. Because if he had to ask, he already knew. On the studio wall, I mounted a frame. Inside, my original atrium sketch. Signed, dated with a tiny note in the corner. The structure holds, not because of its size, but because of who built it. Rachel saw it on her way out that evening. She pointed at the signature and smiled. About time. Every empire falls. Some with explosions. Some with betrayals. Some with the quiet unraveling of everything once held together by pride and borrowed brilliance. Daniel's empire fell with the sound of doors closing. Client doors. Investor doors. Staff doors. But finally, mine. The first collapse was public. The City Heritage Board pulled Whitmore and Company from their flagship theater restoration project. The same one Sophia had promised would put the firm on the national map. A press release followed. The board has decided to re-evaluate its partnerships, prioritizing transparency and proper creative attribution in the architectural vision. Translation: they were caught stealing. The next collapse was internal. Whitmore and Company's biggest client, a luxury real estate firm, sent a termination notice. The reason? We prefer to work with original architects, not recycled visions. And just like that, millions were gone. The final blow came from the Vennings Trust, a multi-generational art and design foundation that once offered Daniel the keynote slot at their annual gala. This year, they gave the keynote to me. More form. I didn't celebrate, but I didn't stop it either. At the gala, I stood at the podium beneath a vaulted glass ceiling I once designed under Daniel's name. I didn't mention him. Not once. Instead, I told the story of a girl who used to sketch buildings in the back of science class. Because science had rules but buildings had soul. When I stepped down, the applause was thunderous. When I left the building, Daniel was waiting outside. He looked smaller than I remembered. Less like the man I married. More like the man I used to admire, before power turned him brittle. Elena, he said. I didn't speak. He stepped forward. I've lost everything. Not everything, I replied calmly. You still have your name. He winced. I deserved that. I adjusted the strap on my bag. Then why did you come? He paused, eyes full of something I hadn't seen in a long time, regret. I didn't come to beg. Or accuse. Or blame. I raised an eyebrow. He hesitated. Then, I came to say, you were the better architect. You always were. I just couldn't stand not being the one holding the pen. That nearly cracked me. Nearly. Because there was a time when I would have given anything to hear that. But now. Now I understood that my worth didn't need his acknowledgement. It was in every brick I laid on my own terms. Every designer who left him for me. Every building that still stood because I had been its bones. I accept your apology, I said softly. But I don't forgive you. He blinked. Why not? Because you knew what you were doing. Every time. And you still let me disappear in your shadow. He looked down. I miss us, he whispered. I shook my head. You miss the woman who held your empire together. You never saw the woman who could build her own. The last thing I said to Daniel Whitmore was this. You sketched over me so many times, you forgot I was the blueprint. Then I turned and walked away. He didn't follow. He knew he couldn't. 2 weeks later, Whitmore and Company filed for bankruptcy. A quiet notice. No headlines this time. No sympathy posts. Just a final email from a shuttered domain. Thank you for your business. At Moreform, we celebrated our second major commission. A children's museum designed to feel like wonder and laughter and possibilities. Rachel brought cake. Miles brought markers. And I brought the old pencil case I used in architecture school. Because beginnings deserve to be honored. Especially when they come from endings you survived. I almost didn't notice it at first. Tucked in the mailbox, wedged between an architectural digest and a donation letter from Miles' preschool. A white envelope, unmarked but familiar. The handwriting on the front was Daniel's. Sharp, slanted, confident in ink if not in life. No return address. No wax seal. Just my name, Elena. I didn't open it. Not right away. Instead, I slid it under a stack of magazines on the kitchen counter and made tea. Miles was asleep in his room, snoring softly through the baby monitor. My mother was humming while folding laundry, pretending not to notice the way I kept glancing at the envelope like it might explode. "You gonna read it?" she finally asked. I shrugged. "Does it matter?" She gave me that look again, the one she reserved for when I asked stupid questions I already knew the answers to. "Elena," she said, "he stole your name for years. Now he's giving you words. You get to choose if they matter." I stared at the envelope for another hour. Then I opened it. There was no apology at the top. No salutation. No, "Dear Elena." Just this. "I was always afraid that you'd outgrow me. Because deep down I knew I didn't build anything without you. You were never my partner. You were the plan." My breath hitched. But I kept reading. "I let ego drown what we could have had. I chased recognition when I should have held your hand. I spoke your words in boardrooms and pretended they were mine, and every time you let me I thought it meant you loved me enough to stay. But love should never be mistaken for silence." I sat down. The rest of the letter was shorter than I expected. A paragraph about his regrets. A line about Sophia, how they hadn't spoken since the bankruptcy, how she left him before the creditors did. A note about Miles. Tell him I wanted to be better. That I tried. And that his mother is the reason any part of me was ever good at all. At the very bottom was a check. Folded inside a smaller envelope. $5 million. No memo. No condition. Just a post-it, "For what I never paid you." I stared at the check for a long time. Then I reached for my sketchpad and wrote one sentence under my latest museum design. "Some debts get paid. Some get learned." I didn't cash the check. I donated it. To a women's architecture scholarship fund. In Daniel's name. It wasn't forgiveness. It was closure. A week later I launched the Legacy Build, a mentorship initiative through Moreform. Young women. Underrepresented voices. Architects who had been overlooked the way I had. Our motto was simple. The ones who drew the first line. Miles asked one night if we could visit the old office. "The one where you and Daddy worked," he said. I smiled gently. "It's not ours anymore." "Can we still look?" he asked. So we did. We walked past the tall glass building with its empty lobby and dimmed lights. He pressed his hand to the glass and whispered, "Did you draw that?" I nodded. "Do you miss it?" I paused. I missed the part of me that thought it was everything. Later that night I tucked him in and found him sketching. "What are you drawing now?" I asked. He beamed. "A house. But it's shaped like a hug." I blinked back tears. "That's beautiful." He nodded. "I want to build places where people feel like they belong." And just like that, the next blueprint was born. Not mine. His. I used to believe buildings were my greatest achievement. But now I know. It was becoming the woman who could walk away from the ones that fell. The international invitation came like a whisper from the universe. A design summit in Copenhagen. Panel topic, Architecture of Resilience. When design heals. They wanted me, not Whitmore and Company, not a +1, not an afterthought. Me. My team cheered. Rachel ordered champagne. Miles made me a good luck card with glitter glue and 7 lopsided stars. I boarded the plane with a quiet mind and a carry-on full of sketches. The panel was intimate, held in an old opera house turned lecture hall. Architects from all over the world sat shoulder to shoulder, notebooks in hand, waiting. I stood before them not with slides or statistics. Just a single photo on the screen behind me. A blank page. A pencil resting on the edge. My name signed in the corner. "This is how every structure begins," I said. But some of us had to fight just to be allowed to sign our names. Afterward I stepped outside into the Danish winter air. That's when I met him. He was leaning by the stairs holding a program with my photo on the front. Sharp coat. Soft eyes. The kind of calm that wasn't empty, but anchored. Your keynote was unexpected, he said. In a good way? I asked. In a way that made me realize I've been designing with my head too long. You reminded me to design with heart. I smiled. And you are. He held out a hand. Julian Ashford. I specialize in restoration projects. But I think I've been missing the soul. We talked for an hour outside that opera house. About structure, about ruin, about the irony of beauty rising from what once broke. When he walked me back to my hotel, he didn't ask for my number. He gave me his card and said, "If you ever want to design something unforgettable, call me." He turned to go. Then paused. Not a building necessarily. Could be a life. I didn't call him the next day. Or the day after that. But I kept the card. And I smiled every time I looked at it. Because this time there was no urgency. No timelines. No looming shadows. Only space. The one I'd carved out of loss, betrayal, and patience. Months passed. More form expanded into a second city. The legacy build funded 20 young architects. Miles started learning how to read blueprints. And one day out of nowhere he asked, "Mom, will we ever build something just for us?" I smiled. "Yes, baby. One day. We'll design it together." I opened a new sketchbook that night. The first page was blank. The pencil sat waiting. And this time, no one would sketch over me. Not again. Never again. The end.